Well, again, I want to thank all of my colleagues who honorably served, and their message is our message. We stand with those people in Afghanistan. We stand with those Americans who were abandoned by this president behind enemy lines. The first priority has to be getting them back home, including members of the press who are still stranded behind enemy lines right now. I know some are reporting, some are in hiding. This should have never happened this way. With that, we'd be happy to take some questions.
Can you respond to the Taliban saying this morning that they won't allow Afghans to get to the airport?
President Biden needs to step up and tell anybody in the world that our top priority is protecting American lives. We're not going to operate by the timeline of some terrorist dictatorship. We're going to operate under the tenet of the United States, which is we will defend our people. He took an oath to uphold and protect and defend the people of the United States, including those that he left behind enemy lines, not based on some arbitrary timeline that he set before he realized the calamity he's created. We need to have the top priority to tell the Taliban that we're going to get all of our people out, regardless of what timeline was initially set.
Should U.S. troops be allowed to use offensive force rather than...
Every option should be on the table to protect American lives. That's the oath he upheld. He took to uphold. It's time President Biden step up and do that job.
Last follow-up, even if it means American troops' lives being at risk.
Every option ought to be on the table to protect American lives. He should have never pulled out without getting all Americans out first. He set this timeline. We hadn't had a death in a year and a half. It wasn't like the country was falling apart, but his own intelligence told him the country would fall apart if he withdrew. He initially told the press, he told the country that he didn't have that intelligence. He absolutely had that intelligence because we did too. I don't want any American lives, but President Biden put American lives at risk when he withdrew artificially.
American lives are at risk right now. President Biden set the date of August 31st. That was supposed to be his deadline. It's now their deadline. It's totally turned the table, and the table was set for it to turn by the president and the actions that we have taken.
Yes, sir.
As one who flew into Tehran at the height of the hostage crisis, some of us have been there before. I have two questions. One, are you aware that there's a view that this is not by accident? That this is a payment to China on behalf of Biden because of what's happened so far? And second, that in fact there is an opposition movement within Afghanistan. There's been demonstrations. There's a large number of people that have 20 years of freedom, and they're not going to tolerate it. Is there any supportive of the Northern Alliance and the civilians that are demonstrating against the Taliban?
Yeah, I won't comment on rumors because there are a lot of rumors about what President Biden may or may not have committed to in advance with others over there. But what I do know is that we had control of the country working with the Afghan army who were serving honorably, and if there was going to be a pull out of the country, we should have gotten every American out first. We should have worked to get all of our allies out who were helping save American men and women in uniform, and we should have gotten the military equipment out. And again, the Bagram Air Force Base would have been one prime place to do that. There are others, and he abandoned all of that. So a lot of these questions need to be asked, and ultimately they need to be answered with candor from President Biden, and we've yet to see that. Oh, I would encourage the Afghan people because, look, if you give people a taste of freedom, which we've done, they're not going to give up that freedom. For many Afghans today, they only know freedom for over 20 years. And so to think that the Taliban are going to be able to come in and go back to the barbaric days of the past, I think they're going to recognize there will be a rise and ultimately resistance to their form of government and tyranny.
Last question.
Yeah. Wait, I'm sorry. We'll get you two right after.
On numbers, what exactly are members of Congress hearing from the administration? Are you confident that the administration has a plan in place to determine the number of citizens left in the country? And then lastly, if there is an extension in place, without knowing the total scope of people still left in country, what is your recommendation? How long to extend it? How do we determine the scope of the mission?
Well, the first thing that needs to happen is President Biden needs to come clean with the total number of Americans that they know are abandoned behind enemy lines. They have a lot of those numbers. They won't share them with us. They won't share them with the press. And I think part of it is they don't want to be held accountable and responsible for what they did. But again, the president's job, you go back to the 1950s, the buck stops here. President Biden said that actually about a week ago, and then he went off blaming everybody else. But ultimately, it's his decision. He's got to own this, but he's got to own up to the American people. How many Americans are over there? He knows a number. He just doesn't want to share it with the American people. I thought he campaigned saying he'd be transparent. He's not. And he owes it to those families to let them know that he knows who their loved ones are and that he's spending every day to get them out. He's been spending the last 2 days on the telephone threatening Democrats to vote for tax increases. Why isn't he working the phones to get every American out of Afghanistan? It's a national and international disgrace. We're not going to play that game. We're working here hard to find out that answer. In fact, Congressman Waltz has legislation to get an accounting of all Americans who were left behind enemy lines. I wish Speaker Pelosi would bring that bill to the floor today instead of what she's trying to bring to the floor to tax American families here at home. It shows you their priorities are so out of touch with the American people, not only here in America, but the Americans who are left behind enemy lines that still to this day want to get home and can't. Final question, we'll go with you.
What responsibility do Republican leaders bear for the way things have unfolded there over the last 20 years? We talk a lot about Joe Biden, but what about the last 20 years and the role Republicans have played in that?
Well, you could even look at last year. You know, President Trump wanted to withdraw American troops. He was very vocal about it, but he also made it very clear with conditions he put in place that he was not going to let the Taliban take control of the country. So every time the Taliban would push, he would push back with overwhelming force. Not with equal force, but with overwhelming force, and ultimately the Taliban pulled back. And he protected American lives every step of the way. We're not seeing this from this president. 3 other presidents before Joe Biden have ultimately dealt with this conflict. It's not been an easy one. But the main objective was, number one, to avenge September 11th and to ensure that we didn't have another terrorist attack on American soil. And you know what? For the last 20 years, thank God we haven't had an attack on American soil. But we're all very concerned about that right now. Because not only do they have our weapons, the terrorists have a country. And we have an open southern border, and they know it. They know they have a pathway in. We've already identified people on the terrorist watch list coming across our southern border. President Biden needs to get all Americans out, but President Biden also needs to get control of our southern border to protect America from another terrorist attack.